Okay, thanks very much everyone for joining us today, and welcome to this webinar. It's going to be about the proposed changes to the Code of Welfare for sheep and beef cattle. My name is Tom Orchiston, and look, we really appreciate you joining us today. Currently, the government is consulting on the Code of Welfare for sheep and beef cattle, and this consultation is currently open for submissions. And look, I think Beef and Lamb would really encourage you, if you would like to make your own submissions so that your views are heard. We would encourage that, and those submissions close on the 15th of July. Today, we've got Will Halliday with us. He's our Beef and Lamb Senior Manager for Technical Policy. And today, Will is going to run through some of the proposed changes that the government has. Look, we are going to have an opportunity for questions that you can ask to Will, and so we're at the Will's going to run through some content, and then at the end we will have an opportunity for questions. So look, I'd really like to encourage you to either use the chat, or we do have the Q&A function there. If you would like to put your questions in, you can put those questions at any time throughout the whole thing, and we can ask them on your behalf. Also, once we get to that Q&A session, we will open up the turn on the cameras and microphones and whatnot. If you feel comfortable and you would like to ask your own question, you can either just message me or pop your hand up when we get to that part of the session. There is more information on the Beef and Lamb website that we've got, and I will post that up into the chat shortly. So there's some extra information in there. And yeah, look, I think other than that, we've got everything ready for you. We will be running some polls today, and so on your screen, once Will's gone through each of the little sections that are in there, we're going to pop up a little poll on the screen, and that will allow you, and we'll just gather some feedback from that. So that's really important for us to get that feedback. So I would really appreciate if you've got some views to put them in there. Look, I'm going to hand over to Will now. So yeah, there you go, Will.
Thanks very much, Tom, for that introduction, and thank you everybody for joining the webinar today. It's really important for us to be able to gauge farmer feedback on these proposals so that we can inform our own, or Beef and Lamb's own, submission on the proposals, but also to encourage people that if they do have a strong opinion on any of the proposals put forward, that they can make their own submission as well. And so, as Tom said, there is some advice on how to do that, or some tips on the Beef and Lamb website. So in the interests of really getting through it, because there's quite a bit of information here, we'll get cracking now. And if possible, we'll keep questions to the end. And as Tom said, please use that chat to put your questions to us. So the first thing that's really important is to understand exactly what these codes of welfare are. The landscape as far as animal welfare is concerned in New Zealand is really, it is led by the Animal Welfare Act. So this is a piece of legislation that establishes our duty of care towards animals, and it establishes offences and penalties. So essentially, if you do anything that results in the unnecessary pain, suffering of an animal, then there is potentially an associated offence and a penalty to go along with that. And so these are very general principles, and they are more closely or more tightly defined by a set of regulations that come in underneath the Animal Welfare Act. So the regulations set out very clear rules for certain specific practices. You may be familiar with a set of regulations that came out about 5 years ago now on the care and procedures for animals. And an example of this would be that we now require the use of local anaesthetic for disbudding calves or dehorning cattle. So these are specific regulations for specific practices that we undertake with animals. For breaching these, there can be either infringement notices, which will come with a fine, or they could be offences that require you to appear in court. Now, the Code of Welfare comes in another level below that, and this establishes minimum standards which we would expect anybody to really be able to meet. By meeting these minimum standards can provide you with a defense that I have not actually breached any of these regulations or a piece of the act, because I can show you I've met the minimum standards that mean I know what I'm doing. The flip side of that, of course, is if you fail to meet the minimum standards, then that provides evidence to somebody to support a prosecution if you are in breach of a regulation. So the Code of Welfare, the minimum standards therein, are not actually legally enforceable standards, but they can be used as evidence to support a defense or a prosecution. So that's really where we are right now. So the code that is put before us contains 28 minimum standards, and these are across 9 categories of animal husbandry. Okay. And each of the standards is accompanied by a list of what's called example indicators. So these are, I guess you would say, they are evidence that you have met that minimum standard. An example might be a minimum standard is that you have to provide adequate nutrition, adequate food and water to your animals. And an example indicator of that will be that your animals are in good body condition. That is the evidence that you are feeding them correctly. Each of the standards is then followed by a list of what's termed recommended best practices. So these are the practices that we are expected to aim for in terms of being the best. So it gives an indication of the direction of travel for animal welfare in New Zealand, and it is recognised that these recommended best practices over time can become a minimum standard. Not always, but sometimes. So that is what a recommended best practice is. So the background to where we got where we are now with this code is that a review was initiated of the existing code by NAWAC in 2019. So that's the National Animal Welfare Advisory Committee. That was led by industry and at the same time as a review of the dairy code and some of the other livestock codes as well. What we found was that the existing code was essentially fit for purpose, but it did need some updating to cover a few new things, such as virtual fencing, which didn't exist previously, the emerging industry of dairy sheep, and there was a big gap in off-paddock facilities, feedlots, feed pads, and so on. So these needed to be addressed. So we'll get into it now. Now, these are not necessarily in order. I've picked them out in terms of what I believe to be importance for our levy payers, for sheep and beef farmers. And so we're going to go straight into husbandry practices, which is probably the largest part of the code, and I think where the most changes are. So if we start looking at the code, the minimum standards rather, there's a few changes here that have either changes, updates from previous code, or additions that haven't been in the code before. And one of these is that when we are marking or earmarking animals, we're expected to take no more than 10% of the tissue out of that ear. Now, I'm very interested to hear whether people think that's realistic, whether it's too much, whether it's too little. So your feedback here is valuable. There's some changes around selection and breeding. It's really just tightening up some definitions, but it's saying that if you are breeding animals and the offspring have genetically associated poor animal welfare outcomes, that you would be expected to not breed from those animals again. Again, it's pretty simple stuff, I think, and nothing that people aren't already doing. There's some interesting new additions around artificial breeding, so semen collection, reproductive technologies. One of these is that if you are collecting semen from a bull or doing some bull testing, you're expected to not use the mount animal for more than 2 mounts. Now, I think for most farmers, this isn't going to be a problem. However, if we do have any breeders, any stud people on the call, I realize you're probably all busy with sales at the moment, but if we do have any stud breeders on the call, I'd be very interested to get your feedback on this as well. Pain relief and castration for tail docking. This has been a hot topic of conversation for a couple of years now. It has been included in this code, but it has been included as a recommended best practice and not as a minimum standard. Beef and Lamb's view on on pain relief for castration and tail docking has been and remains that until the technology exists to provide it at large scale, and that the technology is safe, effective, and easy to use and cost effective, then we won't be advocating for it to become a minimum standard. There are farmers currently using pain relief for these practices, and some who are required to by their supplier agreements. So we believe that on balance, this has landed in about the right place. But again, happy to hear your feedback and incorporate that as we can. There's a new standard around end-of-life management for cattle and sheep, and this essentially means that if you are intending to cull animals by sending them at the works, that they should at least be in a reasonably healthy condition before you put them on a truck. The works are not a dumping ground for old and decrepit animals. There are a couple of things in the standards that we believe are unrealistic. One of these is there on the screen in blue. That unweaned animals to be transported off the farm should have been fed within 2 hours of transport. This has been lifted directly from the bobby calf standard and from the dairy code, and we believe that this is unrealistic. It's actually it doesn't meet the reality of sheep and beef farms. So we will be advocating against the addition of this one. Going on to, there's a second slide on this one because there's quite a lot. The code is saying that there will no longer be the provision for the use of safety pins or ear tags for the retention of bearings in sheep. We've already received some feedback that that people aren't happy about this one. So yeah, keen to hear more feedback on that. But what we have heard from MPI is that unfortunately some of these animals do turn up at the works as culls, and they still have these things present, and that's not good for the animal and not good for food safety. We believe that some of the indicators for artificial rearing, that is feeding orphaned animals, are overly prescriptive and unrealistic in the code. For example, there is an example indicator that calves should be fed a certain percentage of their body weight in milk, and that it should be at least twice a day for 3 weeks. Now, this is not commensurate with systems such as the Pukawa feeding system, which a lot of people utilize, and they have great success with these animals, and it's very difficult to argue that those animals are suffering. So we will be pushing back on that one as well. There is a tightening up of the standard around managing fly strike. The wording is there on your screen. So methods of prevention, I have sought some feedback on that one from NAWAC, and I can say that yes, genetics is considered a method of prevention in this case. So if you are one of those farmers who is breeding sheep specifically to be resistant to fly strike, and you do not use chemicals on your sheep, then you are covered by this because you have a method of prevention in place. So these, I believe, are the most important parts of the animal husbandry chapter. If you have any feedback to provide us on these, that'd be great. Tom is about to open the poll for this. In fact, there it is. It should be on your screen now. So if you could please take a moment to answer the question there. And if you do have any feedback you want to put in the free text panel, please do so. If there are any other parts of the husbandry practices chapter that you might have come across in your own reading, and you think that should be mentioned or you have feedback on, I'd love to hear that as well. So how are we going there, Tom? Are we getting some feedback there?
Yep, that's great. Look, we really appreciate everyone's feedback in there, and I can see that there's some answers coming in. And as Will said, yeah, please, if you would like to use the little text box at the bottom, yeah, fill that out if you would like to. And once you've done that, you can just click on submit. It would be really appreciated. And look, I think just in the interest of time, we'll leave those polls open just for each section, and then when we get to the next poll, we'll close that one off and open the next one. So I'll leave that open just while Will, maybe you want to just carry on to the next section.
Thanks very much, Tom. Yep, we'll move on. So this next section is another one that we've had a few discussions on over time, and people have been concerned about what minimum standards, I guess, might be imposed upon them, for want of a better term. So this is the physical environment, the environment in which we keep our animals. The main changes really are rewording for clarification. The minimum standards, existing minimum standards regarding shade and shelter from cold and shade and shelter from heat have now been combined into a single standard termed thermal stress. So the actual standards around it have not been changed. The requirements to provide shade and shelter have not been changed. There is wording in there around facilities, equipment, and technology, which again have really not changed, and just really is saying that your sheep yards, your cattle yards, etc., should be safe to use, and animals going into them should not be harmed, or they shouldn't be injured by your yards. There's been the introduction of these new bits on off-paddock facilities and on feedlots. Okay, and the wording there is that your animals should only be on these off-paddock facilities for as long as they need to be, and that while they're in there, they should have the opportunity to be able to sit down, lie down, turn around, and engage in the normal behavior, and so on. They don't have to, but if you provide the opportunity for them, then that is what is being looked for. There's not many feedlots around. I've already received some feedback from the largest feedlot in the country on this. If anybody does have some feedback on feedlots, I'd really love to hear it, because it's not an area of expertise that I have a lot of expertise in. Another piece that has been added to this code is just that the virtual fencing and wearable technologies have been recognized here. The standards around them are relatively, well, they're enabling rather than restrictive. But they do say that if animals are struggling to adapt to anything like this, then there should be alternative management strategies available to them. I think it's worth recognizing that virtual fencing and the data collection that is provided by these technologies, they are two separate things. So I'd really be interested if there are people out there using it. I'd love to hear your feedback. If there are people who are not using it, I'll be interested to hear why you don't, and if there are any barriers to that. So Tom, if you could start that poll, please, on the physical environment, that'd be fantastic. And we'd love to hear your feedback. And we'll leave that open again just for a couple of minutes while I move on to the next part. So the next part, well, it's actually the first part of the proposed code, is entitled Stock, Personship and Animal Handling. So a main change here, and one that we have had quite a bit of discussion about, is the use of dogs for catching sheep. Now, we recognise that dogs are often used for catching sheep for the treatment of, I guess, life and death situations such as bearings or potentially having trouble lambing. The standard suggests that a dog catching a sheep must not cause bruising or pierce the skin. We realise that in many cases this may be unrealistic, so I'd really love to hear as much feedback on that as possible. And we also recognise that not all sheep these days have wool, or certainly not 12 months of the year, so it'd be interesting to hear feedback on that one as well. One other addition is that electric prodders, or the use of electric prodders, has been included in that it's recommended best practice that they should not be used at all. Again, really interested to hear feedback on that one, because that one came out of the blue a little bit. We weren't expecting that one to pop up. One that you may have heard, we've been interviewed in the media about, is the prohibition of electroimmobilization devices. Many people I've spoken to don't even know what these are. If you do know what they are and have used them in the past, I'd love to hear your feedback. And if you don't know what they are, then that is great. I would encourage you to stay that way. So Tom, if we could open the poll for this one as well, please, if the other one's still not being used. Thanks very much. So moving on to water and feed. Again, the main points of this part is just to ensure that people are feeding their animals appropriately and providing water for them, because animals need to drink. The changes that have been put into the code this time round are really around an updated set of body condition scores for sheep and cattle. So we can see them up there on the screen, suggesting that any sheep below 2 out of 5 condition should attract some attention from the farmer, and that should be remedied. And that cattle falling below 3.5 out of 10 should attract the same attention. Interesting to note that in previous editions of the Code of Welfare, beef cattle have been scored on a 1 to 5 scale, and in this code that has changed to a 1 to 10 scale to bring it more in line with the dairy code. So I'd be really interested to hear your input on that, whether you think those levels are appropriate, and also whether you think it's appropriate to have a maximum body condition score in there as well, and whether you think those levels are set appropriately too. A new recommended best practice has been included that says that livestock should be given access to a variety of feed with different tastes and textures. So again, just reminding you, this is a recommended best practice. It is not included as a minimum standard, but it does seem to preclude the idea of animals being able to be fed on a monospecific crop. for parts of the year. But again, just a recommended best practice. So I'd be very interested to hear people's feedback on that. So Tom, I'll let you use your judgment on whether the previous poll is finished and whether you want to start this one.
Yep. Well, look, we might there's just maybe a few more people to come, so I'll just allow a little bit more time
Very
just to
good.
finish that off, or maybe give you another 20 or so seconds.
Thanks, Tom.
And yeah, if you have finished your poll, just make sure you click on that submit button. Okay, look, I'll just ask you again just to click on that submit button, and if for some reason you haven't had a chance or you've been cut off from that poll, yeah, feel free to pop anything into the chat, and we will have the questions that will be sent out to you again if you want to put any more comment or feedback into that at the very end. Okay, I'm going to end that now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tom. So yeah, we should be seeing in a second the poll for feed and water. There it is. Thanks very much. So just let us know if you think, yeah, coming back mainly to those body condition scores, I'm interested to hear what you think about those. And again, I'll just reiterate, you know, I'm not going through every single point in the code because it is quite a long document. I've picked out the major changes and the points that I think are going to be most important for sheep and beef farmers to consider. So the next section we'll deal with is actually a new section, and that, oh, sorry, we'll just go back. And that is on animal behavior. So now that animals have been recognized in the Animal Welfare Act as being sentient, which means that we recognize that they are capable of experiencing emotions and capable of experiencing both good and bad emotions. This has been added into the code to recognize that animals have behaviors that are important for them to be able to express. So, you know, I think on an extensive property, it's quite easy for these animals to do so. They're able to interact with each other, groom each other and themselves. Younger animals are able to play. If there are aggressive animals in the mob, that other animals are able to escape from them if need be, and so on. So it's not about animals doing this 100% of the time. It's the ability for the animals to be able to do it if they need to. So you know, personally, I think there's not a lot to argue about here, but really interested to hear what people think. And yeah, and I'd love to hear your feedback.
I'm just going to leave that poll going just for a little longer. If there's anyone else that would like to submit into that, just click on the submit button now, and I'll close it up just in a few seconds.
Thanks very much, Tom. Thanks for all your work in the background there.
Okay, I'm just going to end that now.
Great. So yeah, just really interested to hear if you believe that this section is necessary and whether you think it goes far enough or maybe it goes too far. So thank you for that. So quite an important part of the code is dealing with disease and injury control, prevention and treatment. So really, you know, the basis of the wording in the code hasn't really changed much. If you have sick animals, you need to do something about it. If you have injured animals, you need to do something about it, whether it's contact a vet, whether it's treat it to your own ability, or whether it's to euthanize that animal. The main change this time around in the code is an expectation that your animals are, quote unquote, under the care of a veterinarian. And this essentially means that you're expected, or farmers are expected, to have a bona fide business relationship with at least one veterinary practice. Very keen to hear feedback on this. I've heard some split feedback on it already. The expectation, I guess, going forward is that for those farmers who wish to engage in pain relief practices and so on, that they'll be having an annual consultation with their veterinarian. And those who have an animal health plan or a part of an assurance program probably already do. So I'd be very interested, again, to hear feedback on this, whether you agree that it's appropriate, realistic, or whether you have any other suggestions. So once that poll is available, Tom.
Yep, I'll just give you another few seconds just to finish that off, or push the submit button. And we've just got a couple of outstanding ones. Okay, I'm going to end that poll now and start the next one.
Thanks very much, Tom. Right, well, we will move on from that. I'm conscious of the time and that we will need time for some Q&A towards the end. So there's a section included in the new code around on-farm humane killing. So these are for those, obviously, emergency situations where an animal needs to be put down on farm. The wording in the new code is that sheep and cattle must be immediately or rendered immediately insensible and remain that way until death is confirmed. In other words, the animal must be completely unaware that it is dying. So it will be unconscious and unable to react. It will become a minimum standard that the spinal cord of the animal cannot be severed or its neck broken until death is confirmed. So this may be different to what some people have been taught when euthanizing a sheep with a knife or any other way, but you do not break the neck of that animal until death is confirmed, because the science tells us that it is likely they can still experience pain from that happening. It is important to note that in an emergency situation, the ability to euthanize a sheep with a knife is still permitted, but only if it's the only option left available to you. So probably, it is quite clear that the move is heading towards other methods of euthanasia for sheep, in terms of a rifle or a captive bolt, but the knife is still considered acceptable in an emergency situation. I'll be really interested to hear people's thoughts on this, whether they think it's appropriate, whether they think it's overstepping, or whether they think it's not going far enough.
Yeah, look, if you're on that poll at the moment, I'll encourage you to click on the submit button, and I'll finish that poll up in a few moments. There you go. That should be coming up now.
Thanks very much, Tom. And thank you everybody for all your responses here. I actually can't see them at this point, but we will be going through them afterwards. And they really are a valuable way for me to understand what farmers are thinking and how I can put your thoughts into our submission. So they really are valuable. Thank you. So there is a new standard in this code around contingency planning. So this has really come out of some of the responses and the I guess what's happened after various earthquakes, cyclones, and so on. Just to, I guess, reflect the reality that most farmers do keep an eye on weather conditions and have a plan in place for dealing with these things, but maybe there are some who don't. Now, this is not requiring that farmers have a written or a documented plan. What this standard requires is that you have thought about it, essentially, and if questioned, then you will have at least some idea of what you can do if your power is cut off, if your waterways are cut off, and so on due to a natural disaster, and that people on your farm, whether it's staff, family, and so on, have an understanding of roles and responsibilities should one of these events occur. Okay, it does not require a written plan, but if questioned, it would be helpful if you could provide an answer to an inspector or to an auditor, for example. And again, Beef and Lamb would like to think that people can do this, that it is something that has been thought about. So if you agree with that, please let us know. If you disagree, please let us know. And if you think it doesn't go far enough, we'd love to hear that as well.
Just with the previous poll there, if you've got anything else you want to add, you can click on the submit now. I encourage you to just click submit in there, and we'll move on to that next poll just in a few moments.
So I'll just leave this slide up for a bit, Tom, because we've essentially covered the main changes and the main points of the code that I wanted to, and that we're requiring feedback on. And we can start getting into next steps and then a bit of Q&A. Okay, I see that poll is now open, so thank you again for your answers. I see them flooding in there. That's great. Okay, so while you're still giving us your feedback on contingency planning there, I will move to the next slide, which here we are. So for any more information on this, and I realise this has been a really brief run through, you can go to the Beef and Lamb New Zealand website. Rather than try and give you an address that you can't click on, this is what the website will look like, and you'll see that button there with the wet sheep. Please click on that, and that will take you to our dedicated page on the Code of Welfare. There will be links there to the Ministry for Primary Industries page, so that you can make your own submission if you wish. Otherwise, there's opportunity to email us with more information if you wish, or just get some more background on the code. The next steps, as far as the code goes, is that submissions close in a couple of weeks' time on the 15th of July. And all the feedback, all those submissions go back to NAWAC, the National Animal Welfare Advisory Committee. All of that feedback will be considered and incorporated into the proposed code, which will then be sent to the Minister, or in this case, Associate Minister for Animal Welfare, for approval. It's then up to the Minister to take that through the ministerial process with the government. And Minister has indicated he expects that this new code will be approved and issued by the end of the year. So after essentially a 6-year process, we're expecting to see this finally come to fruition at the end of this year. But hopefully we can incorporate as much of your feedback as we can, because ultimately it is you sheep and beef farmers that will have to live with the minimum standards set out in this code.
Thank you very much, everyone, for your time today. We really appreciate that, and thank you for the comments and questions that you've put up for Will today. And I'm sure we'll be following up with some of the people on the call. So look, really appreciate that. If you do have any other feedback or want to add anything else in, yeah, please scan that QR code or follow that link. And that'll take you to those questions that we went through today in the polls, and you can feel free to email Will directly any other information or questions that you may have, and he will endeavour to get back to you. So look, really appreciate everyone's time today. Thank you very much, and we'll let you get on with the rest of your day. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you very much for your input.